2015, FC Barcelona stood at the top of the football world. Champions League winners, treble winners, the best front three in the world. But what if I told you that was actually the beginning of the end? Because from that peak, one man began a fall so catastrophic, it nearly wiped Barcelona off the football map. His name, Josep Maria Bartomeu. Now, while Bartomeu is a huge rat, the downfall didn't start with him. The roots were planted by his mentor, Sandro Rosell. In 2010, Rosell replaced Laporta and shifted Barcelona's identity. For over a century, Barca prided itself on its motto, more than a club. That's why in 2006, under Laporta, the club made a symbolic gesture by featuring the UNICEF logo on their shirts, not as a paid sponsorship, but as a commitment to social responsibility. They even contributed 1.5 million euros annually to the organization. But in December of 2010, Rosell sold that space to the Qatar Foundation for a 5-year, 150 million euros deal. Just like that, values were traded for profit. Now, they claim that the decision was motivated by the club trying to erase their debt, but it caused outrage among the fans. They felt that Barca were compromising their value, and they were. But that ended up not even being the biggest controversy. Rosell's biggest scandal? The Neymar deal. The club claimed they paid 57 million euros to bring Neymar from Santos. But the truth? It was much closer to 86 million euros. It was filled with secret deals, hidden commissions, and lies. Investigations later revealed that 40 million euros from the deal were paid to a company that was owned by Neymar's father. I mean, that's crazy. That's the bulk of the original price, all going to Neymar's dad. The backlash forced Rosell to resign in 2014. His replacement was his right-hand man, Josep Maria Bartomeu, a guy even more corrupt and incompetent. At first, it didn't look like anything was wrong. In the summer of 2014, Bartomeu actually made some good signings. Rakitic, Ter Stegen, Bravo. He was even the one that appointed Luis Enrique as the manager. This helped his presidential campaign a lot going into the 2014-2015 election, and he actually ended up beating Laporta by a lot. That year, Barca won everything: La Liga, Copa del Rey, and the Champions League. Messi, Suarez, Neymar, the unstoppable MSN. Barca were the most dominant team in world football. They weren't just winning games, they were also playing beautiful football. But behind the scenes, Bartomeu was already destroying the club. Now, maybe it should have been obvious back in 2014. Rosell got the blame, but Bartomeu was also involved heavily in the process of signing Neymar. It's not like he was an innocent bystander. He definitely knew the details of the deal. More importantly, he wasn't a football man. He didn't understand the game. Yet now, he had the keys to the kingdom. And instead of safeguarding the future, this guy set it on fire. It was like letting your baby drive a car. While some of his summer signings had been good, others were not the best. They overspent on two defenders in Mathieu and Vermaelen. Sure, Mathieu scored some nice goals, but for 20 million euros, I don't think it was justified. They also brought in Douglas, who did nothing and occupied a non-EU position. The next season, Barca actually had to deal with a transfer ban, so they couldn't sign and register players until the winter of 2016. Now, you would think that this would have stopped Bartomeu from splashing big money. It did not. Barca spent 41 million euros on Arda Turan, hoping to bring in a creative, La Liga tested midfielder who could add depth and experience. But from the moment he signed, the move was cursed. Because of the club's transfer ban, Turan wasn't allowed to actually play for the first half of the season. By the time that he was eligible, it was too late for him to find his rhythm with a new team. He looked off the pace, disconnected. He looked like a guest at a party that he wasn't actually invited to. The Turk never settled, and he never became the player that they hoped for. The same thing happened to Alex Vidal, who was signed for 22 million euros, another promising addition on paper, yet he was also forced to be on the sidelines because of the ban period. Like Turan, he struggled to catch up, and the momentum that he needed, it just never came. Two expensive signings, both benched due to external circumstances, and when it finally came time to deliver, neither of them did. And I was actually ashamed because Turan specifically was very good for Atletico Madrid. On paper, he had all the tools needed to really help that Barca midfield, but it never came. The following season, more issues began. The cracks were starting to show, and one of the first players to walk away was Dani Alves. Alves was a club legend. He was someone who had won it all with the club. He was the kind of player who bled for Barca, but even he had had enough. Alves left the club on a free transfer, and he didn't go quietly. Time and time again, he spoke out about broken promises, about disrespect. He made it very clear that he was leaving because of Bartomeu's leadership. Barca didn't just lose a right back. They lost a leader in the dressing room. They lost a fighter, and they lost an incredibly good player. And football has a cruel way of coming back around, and you will see this a lot with players that left Barca. Barca. In 2017, Alves returned to the Camp Nou, this time not in a Barca shirt, but in the black and white of Juventus. With his new club, Alves knocked Barcelona out of the Champions League. Bartomeu had caused a legend to walk out the door, and he came back to haunt them. Then things got even worse. Neymar left for PSG after they triggered his 222 million euros release clause. It was the biggest transfer in football history. MSN was broken up. Now you would think that with all that money, Bartomeu would rebuild wisely. Well, he didn't. Instead, he just panicked. He spent 105 million euros on Ousmane Dembele. Sure, he had a lot of potential. We're seeing what he's capable of now. But at that time, that much money for a raw, unproven player coming from the Bundesliga, it was outrageous. Then they spent 160 million euros on Felipe Coutinho. A great player, no doubt, but he wasn't even worth half of that. And then they went and spent 120 million euros on Antoine Griezmann. A fantastic player, but why spend that much money on a player who occupies the same spaces as Messi? It was moronic. All that money for a guy who didn't even fit in the system. It was three of the worst value for money signings in football history. Dembele missed over 100 games through injuries. Coutinho never fit in. And Griezmann played out of position for the majority of his Barcelona career. And then to make matters worse, he was sold back to Atletico Madrid for a fraction of the price that he was bought. In total, Bartomeu spent over 1 billion euros on transfers between 2014 and 2020. And pretty much the bulk of them were flops. I mean, 50 million euros for Andre Gomez, the amount of money that was spent on Turan, 41 million euros for Malcolm, 40 million euros for Paulinho, 30 million euros for Paco Alcacer, and then the whole Pjanic signing, which was a very shady swap deal. These weren't just bad signings. These were the symptoms of a man that was completely disconnected from football reality. He was so desperate to fill the Neymar-sized hole in Barcelona's attack that he just kept throwing money at the problem. Zero critical thinking, zero intelligence. Instead of trusting the club's greatest strength, which was La Masia, he looked elsewhere. He spent hundreds of millions chasing big names, while quietly disregarding the talent that was growing in his own backyard. Someone like Christian Teo was sold for just 4 million euros, when he easily could have done the job on the wing. Munir, a promising forward who had shown flashes of his brilliance, was sent out on loan. And Deulofeu, who was one of the most naturally gifted academy products of his generation, was loaned out again and again, never given a real shot to prove himself. All three of these guys had come through the ranks. They had trained in the Barcelona way. They had the club's DNA. They could have offered depth, balance, and done it all at a fraction of the price of all those big signings. But Bartomeu ignored them. He wanted bigger names, quicker fixes, more hype. And in doing so, he didn't just lose money. He lost the essence of Barcelona. And then came the moment that many Barca fans finally lost faith in Bartomeu. You see, after Luis Enrique's departure, the club needed fresh energy. Someone who could revive what Barcelona football was about, a Barca identity. But instead, Bartomeu appointed Valverde, a very safe, conservative manager who never truly aligned with what the club stood for. Valverde was a competent manager. When you look back at his league results, you would actually maybe say that you were impressed. But he didn't inspire. His football was cautious and frankly dull. People will try and rewrite history about Valverde's tenure, bringing up the fact that Barca were pretty dominant in La Liga. But let's be honest, it was because of Messi. This guy was not good enough to be a Barcelona manager. The risk-taking, joyful football was gone. Every match was a snooze fest. Week after week, the team drifted further from its roots. Even when they were getting results, it was obvious that Barca were not the elite team they used to be. For many, this became the clearest sign that Bartomeu had no idea what Barcelona was supposed to be. As the transfers piled up, so did the wages. And soon, Barcelona's books were bleeding. At their peak, they had the highest wage bill in football history, over 600 million euros per year. That's not just unsustainable, that's reckless. Umtiti, who spent more time injured than actually on the pitch, was earning 230,000 euros per week. Coutinho, a guy who never fit the system, was pocketing 450,000 euros per week. Veterans like Alba and Busquets were still on massive salaries even as their roles diminished. Bench warmers, players who were barely in the starting 11, rotational guys, were collecting anywhere from 4 to 8 million euros a year. Yes, he earned it. Yes, he deserved it. But could the club afford it? Not even close. Bartomeu had built a wage structure that just had no ceiling. You get a bit of money here, you get a bit of money there. There was no plan and no accountability. The result? Barca had a squad full of overpaid, underperforming players and a club that was spiraling towards financial ruin. While the finances crumbled, so did the football. In 2018, Barca had a 4-1 first leg lead over Roma in the Champions League quarterfinal. Should have been smooth sailing. In the return leg, they collapsed 3-0. The first of many humiliations that would follow. Now, most clubs would take that loss as a lesson. Proof that star names mean nothing without a structure, a system, some sort of a plan. But not Bartomeu. That summer, instead of building smarter, he just threw more money at the problem. He spent a ton of money on an aging Arturo Vidal. He thought Lenglet would fix the backline issues. He got Malcolm. In his mind, he probably thought that he's Brazilian. That's basically the same as Neymar. Arthur was good, but he fizzled out. Kevin Prince Boateng arrived, which was a weird buy. This wasn't 2012 anymore. And of course, to no one's surprise, nothing changed. In fact, things got even worse. In 2019, Barca beat Liverpool 3-0 at the Camp Nou. They can thank Messi for that. But then, they crumbled 4-0 at Anfield. A Liverpool team with no Salah, no Firmino, still made the comeback. I mean, that's what happens when Jordi Alba is crying in the locker room at halftime. And once again, Bartomeu went back to the only strategy he had: spend more. That summer, a shady deal was struck between Barcelona and Valencia. Silesen was sold for 35 million euros, and then Neto came the other way for 26 million euros. And it was clear that this was not because of sporting reasons. They were doing something with the books. Creative accounting tricks. No wonder everyone in Spain always gets charged with tax fraud. Barca paid a premium for a backup keeper and then handed him a massive pay raise in the process. Who knows why? Well, now we know why. They were cooking the books, but still. On the pitch, still no changes. Valverde ended up being sacked mid-season, but the damage was already done. In 2020, Barca really hit rock bottom. 8-2 to Bayern Munich. One of the most humiliating defeats in Champions League history. A generational collapse. And you know what made it even more humiliating? Coutinho came off the bench that game and scored for Bayern twice. Yes, the Barca flop had been sent out on loan to Bayern Munich, and now he had scored 2 goals against his parent club to send them packing. Barca also lost La Liga that season too. Just embarrassing all around. And all of this was happening while they fielded the most expensive squad in world football. Then to make matters even worse, came COVID. Barca had forecasted a record 1.5 billion euros in revenue for the 2019-2020 season. To be honest, who can even trust these projections? It was meant to be a financial high point. Proof that despite the chaos, the club could still thrive. But the pandemic changed everything. Matches were cancelled, stadiums were empty, and there was no tours. The revenue collapsed to just 855 million euros, much less than the projected numbers. This was bad. And Bartomeu, well, instead of adjusting, adapting, or even finally facing reality, he doubled down. He kept making shady deals, he delayed payments, and he kept burying debt deeper into future accounts. Bartomeu is the type of guy that thinks credit cards are free money, that he doesn't have to pay it back. It wasn't responsible management. It was a ticking time bomb that was waiting to explode. Then came another scandal, Barcagate. Reports revealed that Bartomeu had been allegedly hiring third-party firms to run smear campaigns. And the worst part is, it wasn't even against rivals. He wasn't paying media sources to bash Real Madrid or Perez or the referees. He was paying them to bash Barca's own legends: Messi, Piqué, Xavi, Guardiola. These posts accused the players of selfishness, disloyalty, arrogance. All of them painted Bartomeu as this victim. It was petty, it was cowardly, and it was the last straw. In October of 2020, facing a historic vote of no confidence, Bartomeu resigned. But by then the damage had been done. His exit wasn't some sort of a fresh start for the new president. It was a collapse of a failed regime. One man had left Barcelona on the brink of ruin. To make the embarrassments even worse, as if the wounds weren't deep enough, Bartomeu had let Luis Suarez walk out of the door for just 6 million euros. They handed him over to Atletico Madrid, a direct rival, for far less than what they paid for some weird players like Mateus Fernandez. And Suarez, fueled by this disrespect, Barca had to watch Luis Lit lift the La Liga trophy, but instead of wearing blue and red, he was wearing red and white. It was classic Bartomeu. He didn't just lose a striker, he improved a rival, and in doing so, he handed them the lead. So when Joan Laporta returned as president in 2021, he wasn't walking into a football club. He was walking into a financial crime scene. Barca had billions in debt. Their wage bill was out of control. And the worst part, they couldn't even afford to keep Lionel Messi, the greatest player in the club's history, the man who carried Barca for over a decade, the guy who played with some absolute overpaid bums and still performed, was forced to leave. Not because he wanted to, but because they simply couldn't register his contract. He walked away for free, holding back tears. No farewell party, no packed out stadium, just the greatest player of all time leaving behind a broken club that had failed him time and time again in the past few years, technically bankrupt. With the walls closing in, he had no choice but to pull what he called financial levers. They were drastic moves that were made in order to stop the bleeding. He sold 25% of Barcelona's La Liga TV rights for the next 25 years. He gave up control of Barca studios and merchandising operations. Then he signed a massive deal with Spotify, even selling the stadium's naming rights. It's now called the Spotify Camp Nou. This deal, to be honest, might turn out to be one of the greatest deals ever made. I mean, which other club has Travis Scott moving like this? These moves gave Barca breathing room. It allowed them to sign stars like Lewandowski, Rafinha, but it came at a cost. It didn't solve the problem, it just pushed it into the future. The club was still paying for Bartomeu's past. One man caused all of this. He left behind a legacy of mismanagement that may take generations to repair. Because Bartomeu didn't just bankrupt Barca, he tore apart its identity. He betrayed its value. Thankfully, the club looks to be back on the right track. Thanks to the very smart moves by Laporta and the beauty of La Masia, Barca are once again feared. To see how they went from being the laughingstock of Europe to one of the most dangerous teams again in world football, you gotta check out this video right here.